Thank you all for being here, and I know it's late. I'll try to keep you awake and not put you to sleep. I want to re-emphasize this idea of keep an open mind. I'm going to say a lot of provocative things, somewhat radical things, and I think you're at a wonderful age. You're at the age where you're starting to decide what you think for yourself. Not what your teachers think, not what your parents think, but what you think. So whether you agree with me or not, take this as an opportunity to reinforce what you think about the world and challenge those beliefs. You won't get a lot of time in life to challenge those beliefs. Something happens to us at around, 30 maybe, 25, 30. We get domesticated, and we stop thinking big thoughts, and we stop challenging ourselves intellectually, and there's something calcified, our brains get calcified a little bit. People don't change their minds about big issues after a certain age, or very few people do. I shouldn't make overly generalization. So you're at a wonderful time of your life. Take full advantage of it. You're going to have about 10 years where all you're going to be doing is figuring stuff out. That is so cool. I'm so jealous. One of the great mysteries, in my view, in the world today is this: capitalism. And when I talk about capitalism, I mean free markets. And when I mean free markets, I mean what? What if free of what? When we say free markets, what do we mean? Free of what? Yell it out. State control. I would make it broader than that. Free of coercion. Freedom means you're free of authority. You're free of people forcing you to do things you don't want to do. You are free to do what you think is right. That's what freedom means. Free markets mean that markets are unregulated, uncontrolled, unplanned by a central authority. That, to me, is capitalism. And this is the mystery. For the last 240 years, we have experimented with free markets. And the result is unequivocal. The result, you can't really question the result on empirical data. The more free markets you have in a society, anywhere in the world, with any ethnic group, it doesn't matter. The more free markets you have in a society, the greater the wealth, the smaller the poverty problem is, the more innovation, the more stuff there is, the wealthier, the richer we become. That's just if you look around the world and you track every country and you give it a grade based on how much free markets they have, it is highly correlated with how well they do from a material perspective, how much wealth and how much prosperity and how much stuff they have. This is true in Europe, this is true in Asia, this is true all over the world. And there are lots of examples of this, right? How many people do you think, what percentage of the population was poor? Real poor. 250 years ago in the world, in Western Europe. 250 years ago, 300 years ago. What percentage of the population was poor? Subsistence farming, having enough to eat, but nothing more than, much more than that. Percentage. 80. Sound right? Lower? 25? I think 80 is a little low. Probably 90, 95%. Basically, you had some aristocrats up here, and everybody else was poor. That's human life. This is true for the last 10,000 years. Economists have graphed this. I'm gonna graph in the air, right? So you're gonna have to. This is the right y-axis. This is time. Minus 10,000 BC. I don't care what time you phrase. And what I'm going to graph now is wealth per capita, or income per capita, right? Wealth per capita income starting 10,000 BC is like this. It's flat. It moves up or down a little bit. You know, Rome was a little bit better, and then it got worse, but almost flat. And then it goes like that. I mean, it literally goes like that. We are today about 300 times richer than people were 250 years ago. Like that it goes. That's Western Europe. If you take Asia, it continues to be flat for a little while, and then it goes up like that. And that's somewhere around, I don't know. When does it happen in the West? Anybody have a date for when it happens in the West? Pick a date. When does that spike upwards happen? What's that? 1890, very late. Happens much before that. When does people start making stuff, creating stuff, building stuff, becoming wealthier? About 100 years earlier, closer to 1790. Now, I like a certain date, and you'll say I'm biased because I live in America, but I like the date 1776. But there's actually an angle you will like, because two things happened in 1776. The one is the obvious, the Declaration of Independence of the United States from you guys. But what was the second thing that actually happened right here in 1776? What book was published? This is a quiz in history. What book was published in 1776? Wealth of Nations. Very good. Adam Smith. The first real book describing capitalism, describing free markets, how they work, and giving legitimacy to the idea of free markets. So I like 1776, but any date is random. Around that period, we started to become wealthier. The percentage of people who were subsistence farmers, who could barely produce enough to eat, who were really, really poor, started shrinking. And the amount of wealth, and the amount of income, and the amount of schooling went through the roof. Free markets worked in the 19th century for Western Europe and the United States. And in Asia, that process took another 200 years. But around 1978, Asia started adopting free markets in different places. Again, 78 is a bit of a random number. But somewhere around that period, different countries did it in different places. But China starts liberalizing a little bit, creating a little bit of space for free markets. In China, what happens? They go from the 1960s. Anybody know how many people died of starvation in the 1960s in China? What's that? 30 million is on the low side, somewhere between 30 to 60 million. Most scholars agree. Died of starvation in the 60s. I was, you guys weren't, but I was alive in the 60s, right? And in China, tens of millions of people are dying. Today, they're relatively, relative to the 60s, rich. At least a big chunk of the population is, particularly in those areas in China where they allowed for some free markets. Where do we still have adjunct poverty? Well, we don't have free markets. Places like North Korea, Cuba, certain parts of Latin America, Africa, which unfortunately has not adopted freedom as a political system. All those places are where there is poverty, overwhelming poverty, where the 95% level of poverty still exists. It works. Take a country like a place like Hong Kong. 75 years ago, Hong Kong was a fishing village with a few tens of thousands of people living there. Anybody here been to Hong Kong? Oh, wow. For a young audience, that's an amazing number. I always tell people you should go to Hong Kong at least once in your life because it's stunning. It's an amazing place. More skyscrapers than New York City. 7.5 million people live in Hong Kong today. Per capita income in Hong Kong is equal to that of the United States of America. They're as rich as Americans. It just, they did it in 75 years. We took us 200 and something years. Why? Are there any natural resources in Hong Kong? Do they have oil wells pumping oil out? Gold reserves? No. None of that exists in Hong Kong. What do they have? They basically have free markets. That's all they have. The one thing the British did when they controlled Hong Kong was that they had a very small government that did one thing only. It protected contracts, it protected property rights, and it allowed markets to be free. So people came there from all over Asia. Poor people came from all over Asia to this little place on a rock in the middle of nowhere and built what is now one of the richest places in the world. With nothing, no natural resources. And it's not like the educated came. It's the poor came, just like to America in the 19th century. The immigrants weren't the educated. It was the poor who came. But you give people freedom, free markets, People produce. People create. People build. It works. So what's the mystery? The mystery is we don't want it. The mystery is everywhere, in the West at least, everywhere, we are turning away from capitalism. There was how many of you are on Twitter? I don't know if Twitter's big here. Right, a few of you on Twitter. On Twitter, trending, the day before yesterday was resist capitalism. Hashtag resist capitalism. Right? Yeah, if you want to be poor, if you want children to die young, if you want a low life expectancy, then yeah, resist capitalism. Good for you. But people think it's cool today to resist capitalism. Politically, everybody's opposed to capitalism. You know, in America, we have a president who doesn't believe in trade. Right? In Europe, we have a European Union that wants to control everything that we do, has to be regulated, has to be approved by some bureaucrat. Even in China, after the financial crisis, they're saying, oh, maybe these markets don't work. They've learned all the wrong lessons from the financial crisis. Everywhere we look, people are turning their backs on the system that's made us rich. And the question is why? Because if you just look at the data, if it's just economics, then there's no real question here. One system is far superior to anything else human beings have tried. Now, most countries today in the West and in the East are mixtures. We have some capitalism, and we have a lot of what I call statism, the state involvement, whether you call it socialism or something else. Statism and capitalism. All economies today are mixed economies. Some have a lot of kind of freedom and a little bit of statism, like Hong Kong. Some places have a lot of statism and a little bit of markets, like, let's say, China or Russia or places like that. To the extent that you allow the freedom to be bigger, to that extent you succeed. Nobody cares. What's growing everywhere is the state and not the element of the free market. So why is that? I mean, why is something that works so well, and you can challenge me on whether it actually works that well or not, because I haven't proved it yet. So you're going to challenge me in the Q&A. Why do we turn our back on something so good for us? And this is where I think morality plays a big deal. Because what are markets about? What do we go into the marketplace to do? What's the purpose of going to the market? Why do you go to the marketplace? To make money, right? What did Steve Jobs build this for? Why did he build an iPhone? To make money, right? Partially. Made billions and billions and billions and billions of money on this, right? But that's not the only thing he did this for. What else? Why else did people go to work, and why else did they produce stuff like this? Connect people. But what did Steve Jobs, when he got up in the morning, what motivated him, you think? I want to connect people. I want to be the best. I want to make something beautiful. I want to create something in my image, right? How many focus groups did Steve Jobs do for this? You know what focus group is when you ask other people what they think they should have on their phone? 0. Steve Jobs built the iPhone for Steve Jobs. To make money and to make himself happy because he loved it. This was a passion of his. He loved making beautiful things. And I like to tell this story. I mean, you guys, you're too young to remember. 2008 was a rough year. The U.S. economy was spiraling into recession because of the financial crisis. And I went to buy my first iPhone because I wanted to help stimulate the U.S. economy. Because I know that's why you guys go shopping. You guys go shopping because you want to help your fellow man. You want to make the economy be better. Right? Why do you go shopping? Why do you go shopping? Don't be shy. Or nobody goes shopping here? You go shopping to make whose life better? Your own. Right? Steve Jobs built the iPhone for himself, and we buy the iPhone for ourselves. I wanted to buy something that would make me more productive and cool. Right? I wanted to enjoy it. Right? I wanted to make my life better. So what's the marketplace? We go into the marketplace, yeah, somewhat to make money, but generally, well, what's the gem? Because consumers don't make money. We're actually giving up money. What are we trying to do when we go into the marketplace? Do what? Yeah, improve our lives. Going to the marketplace is about self-interest. We're going into the marketplace to make our lives as individuals better than they would be otherwise. Whether it's with the new clothes we have, whether it's with the iPhone, whether it's by selling things, whether it's by producing things, we go into the marketplace, into that free market, into capitalism. Is all about self-realization, self-fulfillment. It's all about self-interest, both on the producer side and on the consumer side. That's what markets are for. They're for fulfilling our self-interest. What have your mothers taught you about self-interest? I know what my mother taught me. I'm not going to put you on the spot, right? Since I was this big, I was taught that self-interest is bad. Don't be self-interested. Don't be selfish. Selfish is just another word for self-interest. But we use it as a derogatory term, right? My mother taught me, think of yourself last. Don't think of yourself first. Think of other people first. Indeed, nobility, goodness, virtues. When we study them, what do we study? We study about selflessness, about self-sacrifice, about not thinking about you, about thinking about others first. So that's incompatible with a market system where we're all thinking about ourselves. Think about somebody like Bill Gates. Bill Gates, you know Bill Gates, Microsoft, right? Richest man in the world, 70-something billion dollars last I saw. There's speculation he might become the first trillionaire, although I doubt it. That's like 1,000 billion. That's hard, right? How did Bill Gates become how did he make $70 billion? How do you become a billionaire? Here's a good question for you guys. You all want to be billionaires one day. How do you become a billionaire? What's the secret to billionairehood? Exactly. Make something everybody wants and is willing to pay for, right? And willing to pay for more than what it costs you to produce. The only way to become a billionaire is to produce something that everybody wants. Now, why do they want it? Because it's going to make their lives better. So the only way you can become a billionaire is by making everybody's lives better. The more people's lives you make better, the richer you're going to be. So Bill Gates is billionaire because he made all these people's lives better. Morally, not economically, what do we think of Bill Gates when he was at Microsoft making $70 billion? Do we think he's a saint, a hero? Are we going to build statues for him, name boulevards and roads after him? No. No, the greedy bastard, right? He was making money, so he helped people. Who cares? He made money. He was being self-interested. Self-interest doesn't count in morality. It's not based on how many people you help. If you benefit from it, it doesn't count morally in our society. Now, when does Bill Gates become a good guy? Because today, we all love Bill Gates. Why? What happened to Bill Gates? He left Microsoft. God forbid you make any money. And he went and he started giving his money away. And when you give your money away, that's good. That we like, right? Where you got it from, how you created it, that's kind of seedy. But the giving, that's wonderful, right? Charity is the best. Right? Now, he hasn't quite made sainthood yet. Why? Why are we not quite ready yet to build those statues for him? He's still rich. He's giving the money away, but like he still has like 70 billion. He lives in a big house. He drives a nice car, flies around the world in a private jet. That's not what saints are made of. What would Bill Gates need to do in order to become a moral hero? Give it all away, move probably into a tent, and if we could see some bleeding. Ever see a painting of a smiling saint? No. Because to be virtuous in the code of morality we hold, you have to suffer. You have to show that you have not been self-interested. That's the extent to which we resent the idea of self-interest. Now that moral code, which is prevalent in our society, it's everywhere, it's dominant, is in fact incompatible with freedom and capitalism. Capitalism is about self-interest. It is. Everybody knows it. That's why we hate it. That's why we resent it. That's why no matter how rich it makes us, it doesn't make any difference. There's a wonderful example right now in South America. There are two countries that are the opposite in some respects of each other. One country used to be the richest country in all of South America. And over the last 30 years has become the poorest country in all of Latin America. Because they adopted socialism. Anybody know what that country is? Venezuela. Huge oil reserves. Largest oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. And yet now they're the poorest country in Latin America, one of the poorest in the world. They used to be the richest because they adopted socialism. Then there's another country called Chile. Chile used to be the poorest country in Latin America. And by certain accidents of history, they adopted free markets. And they became, and are today, the richest country in Latin America. No natural, or very few natural resources. Right? What does everybody want to be? Venezuela, not Chile. And the proof of that is that Chile is now elected a socialist president twice, and she is undoing all the things that made Chile rich. And I asked the Chilean, one of the Chileans responsible for the kind of revolution that led to their wealth, why? Why are you turning your backs against free markets that made you so successful? You know what he said? Guilt. We're so successful, we feel guilty. So we're regulating ourselves, we're redistributing our own wealth, we're bringing in controls. Why are you feeling guilty? Because, this is not what he said, this is what I say, because the way to become rich is to adopt free markets, which are a system of self-interest, and self-interest is bad. My mother taught me that, your mothers, your preachers, your teachers, almost everybody teaches that. That is the ethic of the day. It's incompatible with a free market. So what's the solution? Well, my solution, Ayn Rand's solution, and I do encourage you to read Ayn Rand, agree or disagree. She'll make you think. She'll provoke you. I don't know how many of you have heard of Ayn Rand, but Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. And she has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. Her solution is rethink ethics. Capitalism clearly is good. Capitalism clearly produces these wonderful results. Maybe the problem is not in economics. Maybe the problem is in the ethical system we believe in. What does self-interest really mean, she asks. Is it really bad to think about yourself first? Why is other people's happiness more important than your own? Why is other people's well-being more important than your own? Why? There's no answer. Because it isn't. To you, your happiness is more important. Your well-being is more important. It should be more important. You only have one shot at this life. Why not live the best life you can live? Why not be as happy as you can be? Flourish, succeed as a human being. Why isn't that what we admire and respect and love and advocate for in morality? So Ayn Rand flips morality upside down. She goes back to Aristotle. And Aristotle believed that morality was about teaching us how to live a successful life. What virtues and values should we practice in order to lead the best life that we can lead? It's hard work to figure those things out. Being self-interested, according to Rand, is not easy. It's not doing whatever you feel like doing, which is what most of us think about selfishness. Feelings. No, it's about doing what makes sense is right. What rationally one conceives is right. Because what is the tool that makes human life possible? What's the tool that makes human life? Everything in this room is a product of what? Money? How do we get money? What makes it possible for us to have money? Before there was even any money, where do we get agriculture from? How many of you have the gene for hunting? We don't have a gene for hunting. We're pretty pathetic. Look at us. You can look around the room. Bunch of, mostly guys, right? But we're weak. We're slow. No fangs. No claws. You guys try running down a woolly mammoth and biting into it. You're not going to do it. You and a saber-toothed tiger. You're not going to win. So how is it that we're here in the saber-toothed tiger and the woolly mammoth in a museum? What's that? Thumbs? How do we know what to do with our thumbs? Something much more important than thumbs. I know the thumb theory. It's ridiculous. We have a brain. Now, all animals have a brain, but we have a unique brain. What can we do that other animals can't do? We can think. We can think, we can invent, we can innovate, we can change our environment. We can do math. No other animal can do math. I know some of you hate math. Math's wonderful. You can use this. We can write, we can speak, we can communicate, we can strategize, we can invent. You know how we hunt? We hunt by coming up with strategies, by building weapons, by building ditches and tracking animals and doing things that other animals can't do. We as human beings can do. And we do it in teamwork. How do we have teamwork? Because we can communicate. Very sophisticated. How do we come up with agriculture? Well, some genius noticed that if you drop a seed into the ground and you water it, something grows out of that. Now, we all take that for granted. We knew that in like kindergarten, way before kindergarten, when we were 3. But somebody had to discover that. We probably burnt him at the stake, because that's what we do with people who discover big new things. History of humanity. Some genius, some Einstein of the day discovered that. And then came Bill Gates. And he said, aha, I can turn that into an industry. Call it agriculture. And now we mass produce food. Changes human life. All a product of the human mind. All a product of human reasoning. Who cares about thumbs? You can chop off my thumbs. Doesn't make you any less of a human being. You take out your brain, you take out that faculty that can think, that's what makes you human. That's what makes you different. You have free will, you can think, you can debate, you can discuss. That's different. So if you want to be self-interested, what is the one thing you should cultivate? What is the one thing you should focus on? What's the number one value in your life? Well, it's your reason. It's your ability to think. Not exercise thumbs, right? It's to exercise this, exercise your mind. So when they tell you math is important, it's important. Not only because you're going to use it, most of us are never going to use that calculus, because it exercises this. And this is your most important tool for survival, for thriving. So what self-interest really means is not what we typically describe as following your emotions, doing whatever you want to do, being mean to other people, backstabbing, cheating, stealing, lying. All of that is bad for you. You can ask me about that in a Q&A. Lying is like the worst strategy ever if you want to be successful in life. You'll discover that. And you can try it out if you don't believe me. You know, take your best friend and spend the next week lying to them and see how long they stay your friend. They won't. Try it in business. You'll lose all your clients or your employees or whatever. Right? Stealing, cheating, all these are awful strategies if you want to live well. So if you want to live well, you want to use your mind. You want to think, you want to create, you want to innovate, you want to produce. And all of us are capable of that at some level. So self-interest is the pursuit of your own happiness, using your mind to figure out what's good for you in the long term. Now, if you hold that view, what kind of political economic system do you want to live under? Well, what you want to live under is a system that leaves you alone, so you can think. What's the enemy of thought? What's the one thing that stops thinking? That freezes your mind? If I stick a gun to the back of your head and say, from now on, 2 + 2 = 5, or I shoot you. Can you think? Can you do math? Can you build a bridge? You can't do anything. You're frozen because 2 + 2 is not equal to 5. Force, coercion, authority with a gun. Those are the enemy of progress, of success, of your individual happiness, because they're the enemy of human reason. So a society that respects the individual's reasoning capability, a society that allows individuals or values the individual pursuing their own happiness, is a society that eliminates coercion and force from itself, it's a society of freedom. It's a society of free markets. It's a society of capitalism. So the moral case for capitalism is the moral case for reason. It's the moral case for individual happiness. It's the moral case for freedom. Freedom and capitalism are synonyms in important ways. Somebody who wants his own happiness, who values his own mind, doesn't want nanny government sitting on his shoulder telling him, don't do that. You can't drink that soda, right? You can't consume this. You can't work for that wage. We're going to tell you how to run your life. Really? You think you know better than me what's good for me? When did that happen? Don't I have a brain? Don't I have a mind? Can I think for myself? So I'm a big believer in capitalism because I'm a big believer in freedom, because I'm a big believer in you as individuals, because I'm a big believer in your ability to think for yourself, to live your own lives, and to flourish as individuals. And I believe that morality, our moral code, should reflect that fact. So I'm a revolutionary. Not in politics, not in economics, but in morality. That's where we need to change. That's where we need to rethink. And that's where I think the real radical stuff is. Rethink our purpose of life. My purpose of my life is to live the best life that I can live for me. And by the way, that means I'm kind of nice to other people because they're important to me. Right? Doesn't mean you go off and you live by yourself on a desert island, because other people are incredible value. They do great things for you. All right. So if we want capitalism, if we want freedom, if we want to do well financially, if we want to do well materially, we need to rediscover a new morality, a morality of self-interest. The old morality is compatible with socialism, death, destruction, and poverty. Thank you all.
I'll be very disappointed there aren't lots of questions now, and do feel free to broaden it out to a bigger critique of ideas in the Free West or in other parts of the world, American politics, whatever.
Well, the first question is always most challenging.
Okay, do you want to?
Sure, go ahead.
I was just like, so you talk about self-interest. Like, why would everyone who sort of runs all the jobs, they pay minimum wage?
Say that again?
You talk about self-interest,
Yeah.
and that's good. Surely it seems all the employers' self-interest to pay their workers with no money.
That's right.
But surely that's not good for the country on the whole.
So, I don't know what's good for the country as a whole. Anybody here the whole country? There is no such thing as the country as a whole. I'll get to the details. And there is no. I want to get away from. I don't like concepts like the public interest, the common good. None of us are the common. I don't know what the common good is. Most of us, when we put us in a group, disagree about almost everything. So what's good for all of us? Nothing. Right? Freedom is good for all of us. So let's take this situation. Employers, it's in their self-interest to pay their employees the least of money possible. Is that even true? Now, I'm an employer. I have about 50 employees who work for me. And I can tell you that's not true for a number of reasons. One, if I don't pay them what they're worth, they're going to leave. I just had one of my senior vice presidents leave because somebody else was willing to pay her more. Why? Because I was underpaying her for her skill. My mistake, I screwed up, she left, and I'm suffering the consequences. I have to go out there into the marketplace, find somebody else. So employees are not stupid. If you pay them less than what they're worth, they're going to find somebody who will. Imagine you're a competitor of 9. Imagine we're both producing widgets or whatever you want to fill in the blank. And I'm paying my workers less. What are you going to do? And they're producing a huge amount, so I'm making a lot of money off my employees. What are you going to do? You're going to offer them a little bit more. And I see you doing that, and I'm going to offer them, because I need workers, I'm going to offer them even more. A great example of this was in the auto industry in the 30s, I think it was, 1930s. And Ford, one day, woke up and said, you know what? The best way for me to make money is to get the best workers possible. The most productive workers out there. And the way to do that is I'm going to double all the wages in my factories. And he literally doubled them. And what happened? All the workers at all his competitors, who were the best, not the worst, because if you're a bad worker, nobody's going to pay you the top salary. All left his competitors and came to work for him, and he had the best employees in the country. So markets, when functioning properly, drive wages up, not down, because you're becoming more and more productive with the investment of capital. That's how people become more productive. They learn, they study, they get experience, their productivity goes up, and their wages go up to reflect it, and if they don't, they go and work for somebody else who will pay them. And that's, how did we get a middle class in the 19th century? We got a middle class exactly because of that phenomenon. That is the dynamics of the marketplace. Yeah?
Earlier you said it was a very bad game to lie.
Yes?
Why then has Donald Trump, after lying several times, he's now the President of the United States, he's lied about the Iraq War.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we're not going to disagree about Donald Trump lying. There's only one field in human endeavor in which lying actually increases your success rate, and that is politics. I don't know any other field in which to be a liar is actually helpful when you run a political campaign. Now, that I think says as much about us, because we vote the bastards in, as it says about anything else, because we're the voters, and we don't demand their truthfulness. But let me say something controversial which I cannot prove, so I'm saying it, you'll either have to, through experience, learn that this is true or not. People who lie a lot, and I include Donald Trump, and even a bigger liar than Donald Trump, in my view, are the Clintons, both of them. They're all liars. I mean, the politics is built on systematic lying. They're very unhappy people. Lying does not produce happiness. And I don't measure somebody's success in how big they are, right? In how powerful they are, in how much money they make. I measure human beings' success in how happy they are, in are they living a flourishing life. And when you look at these people, when you look them in the eye, when you actually get to know them, most of them are miserable people. They're torn within, particularly the ones who achieve a lot in politics because they've lied a lot. Now, they're honest politicians. They're rare. And the difference between them in just the way they live is dramatic. I'd much rather be the honest politician who doesn't do very well than the lying politician who does well politically but lives a lousy life. And one of the reasons we don't like politicians, why we make jokes about politicians, why we put down politicians, is how often they lie. It's sad. But in business, you'd never survive that. If you lie as a CEO to your shareholders, they'll fire you like that. If you lie to your customers, they're not going to buy your products. If you lie to your employees, they're going to quit and leave. In almost every human realm, other than when it comes to politics, lying is a massive liability. Yeah.
Something that's quite important in America.
Something that what?
Something that's quite important in America
Yeah.
is the sort of social issues.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think freedom is sort of applies to that, and how much of the states they have those?
So give me an example of a social issue, just so we're on the same page.
Social issues, something like gay rights. So
Yeah.
for a lot of Americans, that's something that shouldn't be happening. Should the state keep doing that kind of area?
No, I mean, my view is the state has one job and one job only. And that is to protect individual rights. As John Locke defined individual rights, another Brit, right? Or another, was he Scottish or British? I think it was English. What do rights mean? Rights mean freedoms. The freedom to act in the pursuit of the values necessary for your survival. That's what a right is. It's not a right to stuff. It's a right to act. It's a right to action. And as long as you're not violating somebody else's rights, that is stopping him from acting, which means using force against him, you can do whatever you want. So the government has no business telling gays they shouldn't be gays or they should be gays. Indeed, I don't think the state has any business in the institution of marriage. Marriage is a contract. The government has no business in the contract other than fulfilling its requirements. Right? When you have a divorce, you have to allocate resources and you get into disputes. But as long as you're not, the government has no business in sanctioning this type of marriage versus that type of marriage. If you as an individual love another male, then so be it. right? It's none of the government's responsibilities one way or the other. They shouldn't say it's wonderful. They shouldn't say it's bad. They should be neutral. They should stay out of it. And that's true of all these social issues. I mean, indeed, I would go further. Government has no business in ideas. One of the reasons the Founding Fathers of America originally did not want political parties is they didn't want this coalitions set about ideas. Because they said, look, government's about protecting rights. That's it. It's not about what ideology you come from. It's about protecting rights. It's a technical question. What is a right? How do you protect it? So we don't want these ideologies as the core of what's going on. I don't believe government should be involved in ideas. It shouldn't say, let's take communism, which I think is one of the most evil ideas in human history and is responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people, right? Much worse than Nazism. Nazism's evil, and communism's evil on steroids. Just by the number of people who they killed. If you just measure the evil by that, that's good. But take communism. Let's say you want to be a communist under capitalism, under my system of government. I say cool, right? You get your friends and go live on a commune to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability. Live that way. I mean, you're going to live a pathetic, miserable life. I can guarantee it. But you have every single right to do that in your commune as long as you don't force me to participate. That's the beauty of freedom. You want to experiment with a new lifestyle, with a new set of ideas? Go do it over there. Just don't force me to fund it, to participate in it, to approve of it. Do your own thing and leave me alone. This is Thomas Jefferson had a famous saying about, I'm paraphrasing, if your neighbor doesn't have his hand in your pocket, what he does with his life, what he does behind four walls is none of my business. Yeah.
What's your take on the legalization of marijuana?
Well, what do you think my take is?
That it's good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not an advocate for smoking marijuana, but I'm an advocate that you have a right to smoke marijuana, certainly after a certain age. But I would go further. I know you didn't ask the question. I think all drugs should be legalized. It's none of the state's business. If I want to commit suicide, which I consider taking drugs as being, I have every right to make my life miserable, pathetic. Just don't ask me for help if that's what you're doing. And don't force me to help you. Right? But if you want to screw up your life, screw up your life. If you want to smoke dope, smoke dope. But don't make it my responsibility to take care of you. And I'm not advocating for you guys to do it because you're too young. But after 18, people should have a right to do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting other people. That doesn't mean whatever they want is good. It just means they have a political right to do it. A lot of things people do are bad for them. Right? Yeah.
It's a long question over there. You
Sure.
said that it's okay to have whatever ideology you want to have, but don't force it on
Yep.
like you or anyone
Yeah.
else. Do you agree with, or what do you think about civil liberties being curbed in an effort of counter-terrorism? So sort of the NSA
Yeah, that's good.
spying or taking phone calls and
Well, spying's a good word. That's what they're doing. So let me correct what you attributed to me first. So I don't think it's okay to have whatever ideology you want, because most ideologies, I believe, are going to make your life miserable, and I'm all for you having a good life, not a bad life. So I want you to have my ideology. I'm never going to impose it on you, and I certainly don't think the state should impose it on you, should impose any ideology on you. Now, when there's a threat to individual rights, like Islamic terrorism, then that's the one job the government has, to protect you from that threat. And then the question is how to protect you from the threat. And there I think we need to be self-interested, we need to be rational about doing it, and we need to do it while minimizing the inconvenience and the, in a sense, violation of rights to people who are innocent. So I think what the NSA does is ridiculous. And it's all because of political correctness. Because if I was running the NSA, and I don't want to offend anybody, right? But if I was running the NSA, I would look at what is the profile of a terrorist. And they're almost always Muslim in the United States. And they've been radicalized and so on. So I would listen into conversations as a Muslim, but not everybody else. Because the probability of some Swedish immigrant to the United States being a terrorist is close to zero. So I'm a big believer in profiling. Figure out what the profile is. Now, as soon as the war's over, you can't listen to them anymore. I would also say in the United States that Congress in the US, I don't know how it's here in England, but in the US should declare war. Should say, this is the war. This is what it means to win it. We're going to do certain things in the period of war, which we don't do in peacetime. And when the war is over, we're going to go back to peacetime. Right? And then it's okay to listen and to do these things. They haven't declared war. They won't even name the enemy. I mean, one among very few virtue of Donald Trump is at least he's willing to name the enemy. At least he's willing to say these are radical Islamic terrorists. I mean, Bush wouldn't do it, and Obama wouldn't do it. So I give Trump credit for that. But I'd still like to see Congress pass, go to war, a resolution, and define victory. And then when victory's done, the NSA goes away, all this stuff goes away. Like, I find it ridiculous. The security stuff, take off your shoes, all this nonsense. Like, everybody does it, right? I mean, really? You can't figure out, because they're afraid of profile, because of political correctness. So my wife was once stopped. I'll just give you a story. My wife is Israeli, but she looks more Mediterranean than I do. She's got darker skin. So she looks more like what your terrorist might look like, right? So she was once stopped at the TSA right after 9/11, a few months after 9/11. And she was stopped for additional security. So she looks at the guy and she says, oh, so you're profiling now? And they said, oh, no, this was completely random. And she said, that's terrible. You should be profiling. If I look more like, in my appearance, like a terrorist, then you should, search me more than, some blonde 4-year-old who I've seen security people frisking a little 4-year-old girl because they do it randomly. It's ridiculous because we're afraid to face the reality of naming the enemy. The enemy is what it is. Yeah.
What about school shooters?
What's that?
Majority. What about school shooters who are mainly American?
School cheaters?
School shooters.
Oh, I mean, school shooters, you can't profile, or at least the main profiling there is mental health issues. And people like that should not be allowed to buy guns and should be monitored, right? If you have mental health issues, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. I don't think that's, I'm not everybody should be able to buy a gun and you can buy a tank if you want, right? Guns are a vehicle of violence. Only the government has a monopoly over the use of force, should have a monopoly. It should therefore regulate the tools of violence, and it should regulate guns, and it should determine that some people can't have them. Yeah.
2 questions. Firstly, you are a big supporter of, laissez-faire, small state.
Of what? Yeah, you have to speak up a little bit.
Of small state capitalism. How do you justify the levels of poverty in so-called first world countries? And I know you might say, the greater good doesn't mean anything to me, but you used poverty as one of the reasons why you dislike socialism so much.
Yeah, no, I don't like poverty. I don't want
Also
anybody to feel poor. Not because of the common good, because you're poor and I don't want you to be poor.
Secondly, you claim that socialism and communism lead to a lack of innovation, but how do you justify the Soviet advance from a agricultural backwater to competing in the space race, as well as Cuba's leading healthcare?
Oh my
given
God.
its trade embargo?
Okay, so let me take the first question first. The amount or the size of the percentage of the population that's poor in first world countries is, in the sense of poverty, as we've lived it throughout human history, it's minuscule. Almost nobody is poor in the first world. If the standard for poverty is the way an average person lived 200 years ago, or the way most people live in Cambodia, or most people live in Africa. Nobody is poor in England, if that's your standard for poverty. So what happens, how do we define poverty in the UK and in the United States? We take a belt chart, and we curve everybody based on wealth, and we say the bottom 20%, they're poor. Well, of course, there's always going to be a bottom 20%. But in the United States, and I don't know the statistics in the UK, the United States, the poorest Americans have air conditioning, have cars, have cell phones, not to mention electricity and running water, which we take for granted. Very few people in Cambodia have any of those things. including electricity. So there's no poverty in America in those relative types of terms. Why are there still people who are poor? There's still people who are poor, A, because that's how we define it. There are always going to be people at the bottom because we've got a curve. But secondly, because in my view, to the extent the United States and other first world countries have adopted statist policies, socialist policies, they create poverty. Not capitalism. Statism creates poverty. Socialism creates poverty. So I can give you lots of examples. Take the minimum wage. Minimum wage is a favorite topic in America right now. But the minimum wage is very simple economics. When you artificially raise the price of something, you get more or less of that something. If you artificially raise the price of something, do you get more of that or less of that? Do people want more of it or less of it? Less. If I make the iPhones twice the cost, are you going to buy more or fewer of them? You're going to buy fewer of them. If you raise the price of labor, of unskilled, uneducated labor, are people going to want more of it or less of it? Less of it. So McDonald's now, and all the fast food chains in the United States now, because the minimum wage is being raised to 15 in many cities, are now seriously experimenting, and soon it will be a fact, with iPads, where you will go into a store and order your food and there'll be nobody standing behind the counter. Nobody. And indeed, there is a machine in Silicon Valley today that will do the whole hamburger flipping job. From baking the buns to putting the slice of beef inside and all the vegetables and everything, all automated without a single human hand in it. It's very expensive, but you know what? You raise the minimum wage enough, and they will replace it. Now, why is that related to poverty? Because what you're doing is you're taking a whole segment of the population, typically young black men and women, in the inner cities of the United States, and you're basically telling them you'll never have a job. Why? Because public education has given them a lousy education, they're unskilled, and now they can't even work for $7 an hour, and nobody's going to pay them 15. They just don't have the skills to justify 15. I put an iPad there instead. So you're creating a whole huge unemployment. I think in France, youth unemployment of young people in France is somewhere between 25 and 30%. Why? Because they have a high minimum wage. Everywhere where you have a high minimum wage, you get high levels of unemployment among poor young people. That's how you get poverty. You know, in California, in the state of California, you need a license from the government to shampoo hair. Yeah, because, you know, they might use the wrong shampoo or they might scrub my hair in the wrong way. I don't know, right? So who does this hurt? Poor people trying to get a job. Now they have to go and take some classes, pay $2,000 so that they can shampoo hair. So all we do when we regulate and control and set prices is institutionalize people into poverty. That's what happens. So you get more poor people, the more the government interferes. And the more we regulate businesses, the fewer jobs they create. So the fewer jobs that are available, the less productive people are. Wages are a function of productivity. If there's less investment in capital, there's less productivity, wages are lower. Everything the government does helps create more poverty. Capitalism is the only cure in all of human history for poverty. Now, Soviet Union and Cuba. Soviet Union were dirt poor. They were starving. In the 1970s, there was famine in Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, by the way, has the richest farmland on the planet. Used to be the breadbasket of Europe. But because of communism, nobody was incentivized to grow anything. So they were starving. The only reason they survived is because of détente, where the West shipped them massive quantities of grain to feed themselves. They innovated nothing. If you look at the automobiles coming out of Eastern Europe when the war came down, no self-respecting human being would ever enter one of those death traps. I mean, the shock of people, as much as we knew about Eastern Europe, when the war came down and West Berliners actually went into East Berlin and observed the level of poverty, of filth, the most horrible environmentalist record in all of history. in terms of clean air and clean water was communism. Because when everything is public, nobody cleans it, nobody takes care of it, everything was polluted. It's not an accident that Chernobyl happened in a Soviet country, not in the West. Right? And it's still radioactive around Chernobyl. Space program, sure, they got to space, they never got to the moon, and they never did anything else but the space program, because they were such good thieves. All of the science was either stolen or was extracted from German scientists they brought into Russia. Now, the one thing the Russians were very good at always is mathematics. But to take that mathematics and apply it, you need freedom for that. You need competition, you need incentives, but you need to free up the human mind. Cuba, no human being who values his life would go into the Cuban healthcare system. I'm sorry you're watching, Moore's documentaries. Because talk about lies, it's filled with lies. If you're sick, and I know I'm going to touch on a religious topic for Brits. If you think your National Healthcare Service does you a favor, if you think you're getting good healthcare in this country, you don't know what good healthcare is. You're blind. You have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world because it's socialized. The National Healthcare Service, and I know this upsets you guys, National Healthcare Service is a disaster. If you look at survivability rates based on diseases, the UK ranks close to last among first world countries on almost every one of those categories. And the United States ranks very high on almost all of those categories. But there's one other element which people don't talk about. The only healthcare system in the world today that's even a little bit free is the United States. As a consequence, all the health innovations that the Cubans use in their hospitals were created where? In Cuba? Latest innovation in healthcare that the Cubans produced? Never. Hasn't happened. All the healthcare innovations that the Cubans used are American. 70% of all innovation in healthcare is done in America. By biotech companies, by device companies, by doctors experimenting. 30%, the rest of the 30% is mostly in Europe, where you have relatively free healthcare. Free in terms of freedom, not in terms of free cost. Cuba's healthcare system is parasitical on the United States. Just like your healthcare system is parasitical in the United States. You have cheap drugs here. Drugs, I mean the pharmaceutical type, right? You have cheap drugs here. Why? Because your government negotiates with drug companies and they drive the price down so that the drug company's barely making a profit off of them. So how does the drug company have enough money to do research and development for new drugs? It charges us, Americans. We basically are subsidizing all research and development for the entire planet in pharmaceuticals. The whole world is free riding, if you know what free riding is, it means you get the benefit without paying the cost, of American consumers when it comes to healthcare. So, you know, you need to go visit these countries and really study them. And don't believe a word Michael Moore says. Yes?
You talk about all the unemployment that's going to be caused by automation.
Yeah.
How would you justify the government not stepping in and dealing with this through universal income or something?
Well, two things. One, unemployment because of automation. I mean, I remember that story being told when the first, sewing machines were put into place. And there were riots in Britain because all the manual people were going to lose their jobs. Every single time automation has stepped into an industry, people have said, oh my God, this is the end of the world. We're going to have massive unemployment. I will guarantee here, and I'm willing to put every cent that I own on the table, not that anybody's going to actually collect, so it's easy to do, that automation would cause exactly zero unemployment. I would actually argue the exact opposite. Automation will increase employment. We live in a very automated world today relative to 100 years ago, and yet more people work today than ever in all of human history. More people will work in 50 years than ever in human history, in 100 years more than that. Now, what jobs? I don't know. I don't know. That's the beauty of markets. People will invent things that you can't even imagine needing to be done. So all this is, look, let me just make a meta point. The human race loves bad news. We love to think the world is going to end tomorrow. And we also always think we're so important that it's our generation that's going to kill the planet. There have been millennial cults from the beginning of time. Every few years, they invent some other reason why we're all going to die tomorrow. The latest is automation is going to destroy all our jobs. Automation is wonderful. Robots are fantastic. They take the drudgery out of work and they make work more meaningful. You'll have more choices and more options. Just like today you have more choices and options than you did 40 years ago before computers. I remember visiting London in 1987 on my way to America, and I have an uncle who's a Marxist. I come from a family which has quite a few Marxists. And my uncle, this is 1987, and he went on and on to me about how personal computers were going to cause massive unemployment and going to take people's jobs away. 1987. Exact opposite has happened. And the same thing will happen with robots. Add to that the fact that you lose your job because it's being automated, why does that give the government a right to take my money and give it to you? I don't get the moral case there. Stealing is stealing. It doesn't matter if you steal from an individual by the point of a gun as an individual, or we all vote to steal it from those guys to give it to those guys. It's still stealing. It's still wrong. If you want my help, ask for my help. Don't take it by force. Yeah.
I don't understand how you can argue that automation won't reduce employment when all you have to do is look at the farming industry.
Yeah.
When hundreds of people would have been needed to
That's right.
harvest.
So isn't it amazing that I think it's about 120 years ago, something like 90% of Americans worked in farming, and today less than 1%. Do we produce less or more food? Much more food. But are those 90% that are not working in farming, what are they doing? They're doing other things. They're all working. And not only are they all working, we have today a global economy in which billions of people are working. Not just farming for their own subsistence like they used to, but now they're producing and creating stuff, and they have a surplus, and they can save, and they can go vacations. And you know the word vacation? You know the term vacation, right? You've all been on vacation. Were there vacations 100 years ago? Did anybody, or certainly 150 years ago, did anybody go on vacation 150 years ago? No. There was no time for vacation. You worked from sunrise to sunset to feed yourself. Did we go to restaurants? So today there's a whole industry called the vacation industry, or hotel industry, or restaurant industry. Millions and millions and millions of people work at it all over the world that did not exist 100 years ago. And there will be industries 100 years from now that you can't imagine, unless you're a science fiction writer, that will exist 100 years from now that we can't imagine. But the one thing we know, that our desire for things is endless. And our imagination is boundless. And as long as human beings are free, we will figure out new things to do, new stuff to invent, new stuff to create. Robots, I didn't say robots won't take these people's jobs. They will. And these people will have to be retrained to do something else. But the net number of jobs will only increase. Today, there's about 100 times more jobs, maybe 1,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 times more jobs in the world today than there were 100 years ago before farming automation. Because we got rich and we can afford all this stuff. Somebody in the front.
Time for a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Do you not think to an extent that no state involvement leads to absolute anarchy? Just because 2 points you said, less state involvement means less jobs and less money, but the US government has to buy out the bank globally to stop the complete economic breakdown. And the other one is pollution. You said more state involvement means more pollution, but
No, I didn't say either one of those.
You did. You said in East Berlin that
Yes.
communist government
Yes.
there was more pollution.
Yes.
And the state's having to regulate private businesses
Yeah.
to stop them from using.
Yeah, so let's let's take those. So first, I don't believe it leads to massive anarchy because I still believe in government. Now, there's some people out there who believe in anarchy. I'm not an anarchist. I believe the government has an important job in protecting us from people who violate our rights. So let's take pollution first. If I can prove that your factory is spewing out stuff into the air that is killing me or hurting me, I have a claim against you. We have recognized that in civil law for 1,000 years. You can't take your garbage and put it in my backyard. British law has recognized that for hundreds of years. And indeed, the reason we are cleaner than communism was is because we have private property. We value individual human life. The communists don't care about individuals. They care about the group in some mystical sense. So it doesn't matter what happens to an individual. If we need to kill him for the greater good, so be it. And if we need to pollute for the greater good because we're building up industry, so be it. In America, if you pollute, and I'll sue you, I'll go to the court to stop you. And government has a role in stopping people from hurting other people. Pollution is a form of damage. And therefore, the government should stop it and does stop it. That's why the more capitalistic a country, the cleaner it is. Now, I don't have time to cover the financial crisis, right? Online, I have a 6-hour course in which I talk about every single aspect of the financial crisis. But let me give you the quick 2-minute rundown, starting with the end. The financial crisis was caused from beginning to end by government policies, by government regulations, by government controls. Now, I can't do the UK example. I'll give you the US where the whole financial crisis started. The Federal Reserve, an institution that in my view should not exist, kept interest rates below the rate of inflation. Now, when you study finance, ask the professor what that means. But basically what that means is that you're incentivized to borrow money. So guess what happened in America? If you keep the rate really low, what do people do? They borrow money like crazy. We borrowed huge amounts of money. What did we do with the money we borrowed? We bought homes. Why did we buy homes? Because the government wanted us to buy homes. They were subsidizing the homes. Freddie and Fannie and the Federal Home Loan Bank, and you could go on and on and on, all the ways the US government subsidizes housing. So we took all the money we borrowed and we bought houses. And the banks let us buy these houses even though we couldn't afford them because the banks have too big to fail, which is a government policy saying to the banks, you can make all the profits on the way up, but on the way down, we'll bail you out. At every level of the crisis, it was a government regulation, a government mandate, a government intervention that created the insane, irrational behavior there was. You cannot find that behavior in a truly free market. Systemic risk, which regulators love to talk about, is a government phenomenon. There is no systemic risk in a marketplace that's competitive. Systemic risk is created by the Federal Reserve. Anything it does is systemic, and created by regulations which bind everybody together because they're all regulated by the same agencies. And if people say there wasn't enough regulation, you know how many regulators every US bank has? Every single US bank is regulated by 7 different regulators. They're massive amount. Banking in America is a public utility. They're basically owned by the government and with a pretense that they are free, that they can run. So the financial crisis is an exact example of how statism fails. When you try to manipulate financial markets, only bad stuff happens. The government should stay out, and you will get a lot more stability than you do.
One more question.
All right.
At what level do you think the government should make sure people aren't starving, ensure people have a right to life, and beyond that, sort of how should government provide education and other sort of services like that?
So how many people in this room support helping people who are starving? Good. Then do it. What do you need the government to do it for you? Well, we need the government to do it for us. No, you should, no, because you obviously value, to one extent or another, you don't want people starving in the streets. So get together, form a charity, commit to putting X amount of money every month into the charity, and go help poor people. But why have a government that uses a gun that arbitrarily takes this amount of money from this group and that amount of money from this group, and if this group lobbies really, really hard, they take less from them, and it's all about power, and just voluntarily go help the people you want to help. I mean, good for you. So I'm all for having a safety net. I just believe it should all be voluntary instead of coerced. I don't believe in coercion. I think coercion is bad. I think forcing people to do things is not good. It doesn't make you moral if somebody forces you to give charity. If you believe charity is moral, you should do it out of your own goodwill. If you're forced, then it doesn't mean anything anyway. So you want a safety net, go do it. But don't force me to participate if I don't want. Or if my kid is having surgery and I need the money for that. Or if I'm trying to put bread on the table for, don't decide what's good for my money. You decide what's good for your money. You want to give to poor people, give it to them. So all I want is a voluntary society instead of a force. I want coercion, force taken out. What was the second half of the question?
Education.
Education. Same thing in education. I believe that public education is a bad thing. It stifles innovation. It stifles competition. I would love to see the next innovator, instead of figuring out the next stupid app for this thing, coming up with the next great idea in education. Imagine if we had real innovation and competition in the field of education, and I don't want to insult your teachers by any means, but imagine the kind of progress we might make, right? Because competition actually results in, change, in progress, in prices going down, not up. Every field in which we introduce competition, prices go down. So let's have some competition. Let's have some innovation. Let's get the profit motive into education. And now, some kids won't be able to afford the education. By the way, there's an entrepreneur in America who is setting up a network of private schools in America, and he's trying to experiment how cheap can he make this education. We're talking about K through 12, right? So, and he's down to about $4,000 a year, and he thinks he can drive it cheaper. High quality education for a low cost. That's an entrepreneur. It takes entrepreneurial thinking to do that. So imagine if that kind of entrepreneur thing. But let's say still there's somebody who can't afford to go. How many of you would help him? I would. I value education greatly, and I assume all of you would. Okay, so we'll help him. Why is that a problem? And Apple would help him, and IBM would help him, and Walmart would help them because they want future employees, and they want to do good in the world, and so on. Why do we need coercion? Why do we need a teachers' union? Why do we need the state to regulate curriculum and to tell you what to do and what not to do and how to do it and what kind of schooling is good and what kind of schooling is bad? Let's have some, real experimentation in this, and let's figure out what's good and what's bad, what works and what doesn't. And if you've already figured that out, great. Now let's try to drive prices down so that everybody can afford a high quality, education like you guys are getting. But the fact is, in America, public education is awful. We have really bad outcomes, and they're directly related to socioeconomic status. So poor people get the worst education. And wealthy people get decent education. I don't think it's very good, but it's decent in public schools. So all public schools are doing are hurting the poor. It's tragic, and I'll give you some numbers, and then I'll stop. Right? In the city of Chicago, it costs to educate one child in the public school system $15,000 a year. Remember that guy from Austin who could do it for $4 or $5? $15,000 a year in the inner cities, in the worst neighborhoods in Chicago. In the same places, across the street, the Archdiocese, the Catholic Church, has its schools. Guess how much it costs them to educate one child? $7,500. Half the price. Same kids, same neighborhoods. It costs them half what it costs the city. The city could basically shut down all the public schools and pay the Archdiocese and save half the money. Right? Now, I'm not advocating Catholic education. I'm just saying that it's unbelievably inefficient and it produces a lousy product. So, we should learn from experience. We should look at what's good and what works and what doesn't work, and scrap the stuff that doesn't work and invest heavily in the stuff that works. Private industry works in every single field that it goes into. There has been no breakthroughs and innovations and massive progress in the public sector. It comes from the private sector. So let's invest in the private sector. And you don't have to invest money into it. All you have to do is free it up, leave it alone, take away the reins, and let people go crazy innovating and producing, creating, and improving all of our lives. Thank you.
Marches on, Dr. Brook, but you've really got us going tonight, and if there are more hands that would like to ask questions. If you walk out of this room, as I said at the start, thinking about things differently, or at least being more desirous of asking hard questions about why you think what you think, even if you walk away and tomorrow, over the next few weeks, months, take a position which is completely opposite to that of Dr. Brook, Dr. Brook will still be happy because he will know that in a free society you have made your own mind up for your own reasons. And I think we've been very lucky people here tonight, and I just want to thank you for coming and wish you all the best in the rest of your talk.
Pleasure, thank you.